The dusty streets of Copper Ridge had seen better days. Tumbleweeds rolled past the weathered storefronts like forgotten memories, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth. Most people had left years ago, chasing opportunities in bigger towns, leaving behind only the stubborn and the broken. Among them was Jake Hollister, a man whose face told stories of decades spent under that relentless sun. Jake sat on the porch of the old general store, his worn leather boots propped against a wooden railing that had been painted so many times it barely held its color. His weathered hands held a glass of water, nothing stronger. He'd given up whiskey 5 years ago after it nearly took his life. Now, at 63, he was just a shadow of the man he used to be. The loneliness had carved deep lines into his face, making him look even older than his years. He watched the road leading out of town, a habit he'd developed over the past decade. Not many visitors came to Copper Ridge anymore. The town had become a place where people came to disappear, not to arrive. So when he saw the cloud of dust approaching from the horizon, Jake's attention sharpened. A truck was coming, and it was moving fast. The vehicle pulled up in front of the general store with urgency, kicking up dust that settled slowly in the afternoon heat. When the door opened, Jake saw something that made him grip his glass tighter. A young woman stepped out, and she was enormous in every way. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to command the very air around her. Her name was Catherine, though Jake wouldn't learn this for several more minutes. Catherine moved with surprising grace for someone her size, her long legs carrying her purposefully into the store. Jake watched her disappear inside, then returned his gaze to the empty road. He told himself it was none of his business. Strangers came and went. That was just how things were. But something about her energy had disrupted the stillness of his day. Inside the store, Catherine was frantically searching for supplies. Her truck had broken down 8 miles outside of town, and cell service was non-existent. She needed rope, supplies to repair her vehicle, and directions to the nearest mechanic. The store owner, Mrs. Chen, was helping her gather what she needed when Catherine asked about getting her truck fixed. "The only person who can help you is Jake," Mrs. Chen said, pointing outside toward the porch. "He's forgotten more about vehicles than most people ever learn. But fair warning, he doesn't talk much to new people." Catherine walked back outside with her supplies and approached Jake directly. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need your help," she said, her voice surprisingly soft for someone so large. "My truck broke down about 8 miles north. I need someone who knows mechanics." Jake looked up slowly, taking in her full appearance. There was something different about her. Despite her intimidating size, her eyes held a desperate vulnerability. "I can take a look," he said finally, standing up with a grunt. His knees protested the movement after sitting for hours. "Thank you," Catherine said, relief flooding her face. "I wasn't sure how this day would go." As they walked toward Jake's garage behind the store, Catherine explained that she'd been driving through trying to reach a new job in Denver. She'd been traveling for 2 days straight, trying to escape her past, trying to find a fresh start in a place where nobody knew her story. Copper Ridge wasn't on her route, but it seemed destiny had other plans. Jake listened without much response, but he was listening. He was paying attention in a way he hadn't paid attention to anything in years. They reached his garage, a large corrugated metal building that had seen better days. Inside, his tools were organized with meticulous care, the one area of his life where he maintained order and discipline. "Pop the hood," he said simply, and Catherine did. As he leaned in to examine the engine, he could smell motor oil and something floral from her presence behind him. It was strange, having someone in his space after so long. The engine had seized. It would take hours to figure out what was wrong, possibly days to fix it. As Jake worked, he could feel Catherine watching him, waiting, hoping. Neither of them knew that this moment would change everything. Jake worked steadily through the late afternoon and into the evening, methodically diagnosing the truck's problems. Catherine sat in an old metal chair in the corner of the garage, occasionally asking questions about what he was doing. He answered briefly, his words efficient and sparse. She didn't seem to mind his quietness, in fact, she seemed to appreciate it. By 7 o'clock, Jake had identified the issue. The water pump had failed completely, and the damage had spread to the alternator. It wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't a quick fix either. "This is a 2-day job, maybe 3, he told her, wiping his hands on a rag that had been his faithful companion for years. "I can get the parts tomorrow morning from a supplier I know in the next county over. You could stay at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen runs it." Catherine's shoulders fell slightly. 3 days, she repeated, as if testing the weight of those words. "I can't afford much. My money is tight." Jake nodded, understanding immediately. He'd been tight on money himself for years. "I'll charge you for parts only. Labor is free." He said it matter-of-factly, already turning away to clean his tools, not wanting to see her reaction. "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Jake paused, his hand stilling. Why indeed? He wasn't a charitable man. Life had taught him that kindness was often repaid with disappointment. But looking at this enormous woman who seemed so fragile in her own way, he found himself saying, "Because I remember what it's like to need help and have nobody give a damn." Catherine was silent for a moment. Then she said, "My name is Catherine Wells. I'm running from my life." Jake turned to face her fully. "Jake Hollister. And we all are, in one way or another." Over the next 3 days, a strange friendship began to form. Catherine stayed at the boarding house, but she spent most of her time in the garage with Jake. He worked on her truck while she talked, sharing pieces of her story gradually, like she was testing whether he could handle the truth of who she was. She'd been married to a man named Marcus for 4 years. They'd met in college, and he'd been charming at first, but as the years went on, his behavior became increasingly cruel. He mocked her for her height, for her intelligence, for her dreams. When she finally decided to leave, he'd blocked her bank accounts and hidden her important documents. It had taken her 3 months to escape, to rebuild her life, to gather enough money to start over. "He used to say I was a freak," Catherine told Jake on the second day, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. "He said nobody else would ever want someone like me. That I should be grateful he was with me." Jake didn't respond immediately. He was under the truck, replacing a fluid line. When he emerged, he said simply, "He was a coward. Men like that are always cowards. They need to make you small so they don't have to face how small they really are." Catherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "How do you know that?" "Because I married a woman like him once," Jake said, turning away. "Different gender, same poison. Took me 20 years to leave." This revelation shifted something between them. They were no longer just strangers in a broken-down garage. They were two damaged people, and somehow, that damage became a bridge instead of a barrier. By the afternoon of the third day, Jake had completed all the repairs. The truck was running smoothly, purring like a contented cat. Catherine should have left then. There was nothing keeping her in Copper Ridge. But when Jake told her the work was done, she didn't move toward the truck. Instead, she looked at him and asked, "What if I stayed for a little while?" Jake's hands stilled on his workbench. "Why would you do that?" "Because for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe," Catherine said. "And I think maybe you know something about that too." 3 weeks passed. Catherine had rented a room at the boarding house indefinitely, and she'd started working at the small diner on Main Street, helping Mrs. Chen's cousin who owned it. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and more importantly, it gave Catherine purpose. For the first time since leaving Marcus, she felt like she was building something instead of running from something. Jake had fallen into a new rhythm as well. He still woke early, still maintained his solitary routine, but now there was anticipation woven through his days. Catherine would stop by the garage during her lunch break. They'd sit in the old chairs, eat sandwiches that she'd prepared, and talk about everything and nothing. They talked about books they'd read, movies they'd seen on TV, dreams they'd abandoned, and slowly, very slowly, a different kind of bond began to form. One evening, 4 weeks into Catherine's stay in Copper Ridge, Jake asked her if she wanted to get dinner. Not at the diner, but somewhere special. They drove to the next town over, about 40 minutes away, and found a small Italian restaurant that overlooked a river. It was the kind of place Jake hadn't been to in decades. He felt nervous, which surprised him. He was 63 years old, and here he was, nervous like a teenager. Catherine wore a simple blue dress, and she looked beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards of beauty. She had presence, strength, and intelligence radiating from her. When the other patrons stared at her, Jake felt a surge of something fierce inside him. She belonged in this world just as much as anyone else, and her refusal to apologize for taking up space was one of the many things he'd come to admire about her. Over dinner, Jake told her about his life before Copper Ridge. He'd been a rodeo champion once, traveled across the country, had opportunities. But he'd married too young, to a woman who resented him, who made him feel small and inadequate. The marriage had lasted 23 years, and by the end, he was drinking himself to death. When she finally left him, he'd come to Copper Ridge to disappear, to find some kind of peace. "I thought I'd live out my years alone," he said, cutting into his pasta. "I made peace with that. I thought I deserved that. Did you? Catherine asked quietly. Deserve that? Jake looked at her across the candlelit table. I'm not sure anymore. They drove back to Copper Ridge in comfortable silence. When they reached Catherine's boarding house, Jake walked her to the door. He wanted to kiss her, but he was afraid. Not of rejection, but of what it would mean. Once he crossed that line, everything would change. Jake, Catherine said, turning to face him in the darkness. I need to tell you something. The job in Denver, it fell through. They hired someone else. I found out 2 weeks ago. Jake's heart sank. Why didn't you tell me? Because, Catherine said, taking a step closer, I realized I didn't want that job. I realized what I wanted was here. I want to figure out if what we have could be something real. Jake reached for her hand. Her palm was warm, her fingers long and strong. Catherine, I'm an old man. I'm broken in ways that might never heal. I can't promise you a perfect life. I don't want perfect, Catherine said. I want real. I want someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't flinch. I want someone who understands what it feels like to be broken and is brave enough to try rebuilding anyway. Jake kissed her then, and it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally pulled apart, he said the words that had been building inside him for weeks. Come home with me. Not to the boarding house. To my home. Let's see what we can build together. Catherine didn't hesitate. She said yes. Moving in together proved to be both easier and more complicated than either of them expected. Jake's small house on the outskirts of Copper Ridge was modest but functional. Catherine brought with her a few belongings and a sense of lightness that gradually transformed the space. She added color with paintings, warmth with photographs, and laughter that seemed to echo through rooms that had been silent for far too long. They had 3 months of happiness. Real, genuine happiness. They worked, they laughed, they made plans. Catherine talked about going back to school to finish her degree. Jake talked about possibly opening a small welding business, creating something instead of just fixing what others broke. For the first time in decades, both of them felt like life was moving forward instead of backward. But on a Tuesday afternoon in October, everything shifted. Jake was working in the garage when a truck he didn't recognize pulled up. A man got out, someone in his early 40s with an expensive suit and an expensive watch. Jake recognized the type immediately, the kind of man who took what he wanted and felt entitled to it. I'm looking for Catherine Wells, the man said without preamble. She here? Every instinct in Jake's body went rigid. Who's asking? Marcus Wells. I'm her husband. The words fell between them like stones. Jake's mind raced. Husband. Catherine had never said she was still married. She'd said she left her marriage, but she hadn't mentioned the paperwork, the legal details. He'd assumed it was handled, that she was free. She's not here, Jake said carefully. Then you're the one she's been screwing around with, Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt. Let me guess, she told you some sad story about how mistreated she was. How I was the villain. She's good at that. She's very good at making herself the victim. I think you should leave, Jake said quietly, but there was steel underneath the words. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to her. See, Catherine took something from me when she left. Money, personal items, and more importantly, she humiliated me. I'm not done with her. At that moment, Catherine appeared in the garage doorway. She'd walked over from the diner, something she did most days. When she saw Marcus, her face went white, and Jake watched her entire body stiffen. She'd worked so hard to get away from this man, and here he was, materializing like a nightmare made flesh. You need to leave, Catherine said, her voice shaking but firm. I have a restraining order. You violated it by coming here. A restraining order I'm having overturned, Marcus said with a cruel smile. I've been working with a very good lawyer. See, my version of events has finally started to gain traction. You were mentally unstable. You stole from me. You damaged my career. And now I'm going to spend the rest of your life making sure everyone knows what you really are. Jake stepped between them. She said to leave. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, I'm leaving. But this isn't over. Not even close. Catherine, enjoy your time with this old man. Because soon enough, you'll be back where you belong, in court, fighting for your freedom. He left, but his words lingered in the air like poison gas. Catherine sank onto a bench in the garage, her enormous frame suddenly looking fragile. Jake sat beside her, not knowing what to say. I should have told you, Catherine whispered. The divorce wasn't finalized. My lawyer said it was complicated, that he was contesting it. I kept thinking it would be resolved soon, and I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want this to be real. Is that why you stayed? Jake asked, and he hated the doubt creeping into his voice. Because you were stuck. Catherine looked at him with tears streaming down her face. No. I stayed because I love you. But I understand if that's not enough now. I understand if this is too much. Jake wanted to reassure her, but Marcus's words had planted seeds of fear. Catherine was half his age. She was beautiful in ways that transcended her physical form. What was she really doing with an old broken man like him? Had she simply been vulnerable and lonely, and had he taken advantage of that? These thoughts would haunt him for days. The legal battle that followed was brutal. Marcus's lawyer was relentless, filing motion after motion, dragging out the proceedings. Catherine had to recount her experiences of emotional abuse, manipulation, and threats. Jake listened to everything she revealed, every painful detail of her marriage, and slowly, the doubt that had been eating at him began to transform. He realized something important. He was afraid. Not of Catherine or her past, but of losing her. He was terrified that Marcus would somehow win, that the law would side with this predatory man, that Catherine would be forced back into a situation where she'd have no choice. 2 months into the proceedings, on a cold December night, Jake found Catherine sitting on the porch of their home, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the stars. He'd been giving her space, had been careful not to push, had been waiting for her to say the words that would decide their future. I've been thinking about something, Catherine said as he sat beside her. Marcus wants me to be afraid. He wants me to doubt myself, doubt us, doubt whether any of this is real. And for a while, I wondered if I was making a mistake by staying with you. But then I realized something. Jake waited, barely breathing. He controls me by making me question my own judgment, Catherine continued. He's done it for years. So if I leave you because he tells me to, if I let fear drive my decisions, then he still controls me. And I can't live like that anymore. What are you saying? Jake asked, though he thought he knew. Catherine turned to face him fully. I'm saying I don't care how long this takes. I don't care if the legal system fails me. I don't care what he threatens or what stories he tells. I'm staying. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. And I need you to choose that too, completely, without doubt. Jake felt something break open inside his chest. All the years of loneliness, all the self-imposed isolation, all the belief that he didn't deserve happiness, it crystallized into a single moment of clarity. Catherine was offering him redemption, and he'd almost thrown it away because of fear. I'm terrified, he said honestly. I'm terrified that I'm not enough, that I'm too old, that I'll somehow mess this up. We'll be terrified together, Catherine said, and she smiled through her tears. But at least we won't be alone. Jake reached into his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple silver band. I know this is fast, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know it's unconventional. But Catherine Wells, I don't want to spend another day of my life wondering if you're going to stay. I want to know. I want to build something real with you. Will you marry me? Catherine's response was not words but action. She kissed him with all the passion and hope and defiance that she carried in her enormous heart. When she finally pulled back, she said, yes. Yes, absolutely yes. 2 weeks later, when Marcus's lawyer called to say that Marcus was dropping the case and was willing to finalize the divorce, Catherine wasn't even surprised. She'd stopped letting him control her narrative. She'd stepped into her own power. 6 months later, on a beautiful spring morning, Catherine and Jake stood in the small white chapel on the edge of Copper Ridge. Catherine wore a custom-made white dress that had required a designer to fly in from Denver. Jake wore a suit he'd bought specifically for the occasion, his hair freshly cut, his face clean-shaven. Mrs. Chen was there, and the diner owner, and the people who'd come to know them both. As they exchanged vows, Jake understood something fundamental about life. It wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone broken in ways that complemented your own brokenness, someone willing to stand beside you and say, I see you, I choose you, I'm brave enough to try. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Catherine kissed Jake with the same intensity she had on that porch 4 months ago. The small congregation applauded. And somewhere in the clarity of that moment, 2 broken people became whole, not by being fixed, but by choosing to face their futures together. Later that evening, as they danced under stars in the backyard of Mrs. Chen's boarding house, Jake whispered to Catherine, Can you suck it? Can you handle this life with me, right here, in this small forgotten town? Catherine smiled that smile that had first caught his attention, the smile of someone who'd fought hard for her freedom and refused to waste it. I can suck it, she said. I'm sucking it up every single day. Because this is mine. You are mine. And I'm finally home. And in that moment, Copper Ridge stopped being a place where people came to disappear. It became a place where two lost souls had finally been found.